Welcome to today's webinar on Security Q&A e-Business Suite. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. We have two speakers today. The first one is Steve Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrigy Corporation, and he's been working with the Oracle product since 1994. And for the past 12 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle e-Business Suite and Oracle database, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences. Also with Steve is Mike Miller. Mike is the Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Integrigy and responsible for Integrigy Security Assessment Services. For the past 16 years, Michael has been focused exclusively on Oracle's e-Business Suite and has sat on Oracle's Customer Advisory Board for Security and Oracle's On Demand. So I'll now turn it over to Steve and Mike.
Thanks so much, Phil. So today, Mike and I are going to go through and answer your questions on Oracle e-Business Suite Security. When you registered, a lot of you submitted questions, so we have those questions, and then we've also had some questions come in for those of you live on the webinar today. So we'll go through each of those questions and try to provide the answers from Integrigy's perspective. Before we get started, I'll give you a brief background about Integrigy for those of you not familiar with us. Integrigy was founded in 2002 and specializes in Oracle e-Business Suite security. Integrigy has two sides to our business. We do have a set of security products related to the Oracle e-Business Suite, and we also do services. And the purpose of this webinar today was actually for the 10th anniversary of AppSentry. So we developed a tool back 10 years ago in 2004, specializing in Oracle e-Business Suite security, and our product AppSentry goes through the Oracle e-Business Suite environment and scans the environment looking for compliance, security, and other risks in the Oracle e-Business Suite environment. Our other product, AppDefend, is an enterprise application firewall for the Oracle e-Business Suite. So if you've implemented Oracle e-Business Suite in the DMZ, AppDefend provides another layer of security to protect against known security vulnerabilities, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, things like that. A lot of the knowledge today that we're going to be presenting is based off of our services. So Integrigy does a lot of on-site security assessments, working with many large customers, trying to help them with their Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, HIPAA compliance. We also do a lot of design work with e-Business Suite, so if you do have auditing challenges, encryption, implementing in the DMZ, Integrigy can work with you to help solve those challenges in a very efficient, cost-effective way. So enough about Integrigy. We can now start getting into the questions. So the first question is from Jeff. It seems that everyone in IT has access to the apps account. How should we control access to apps? And what about other privileged accounts? So this is actually a pretty good question that we get quite often, trying to work with our customers on privileged account access. When we start looking at the privileged accounts in Oracle e-Business Suite, you actually have quite a few. So as part of the Q&A, we do have a few slides that we've got queued up just to kind of give you some background. So when we talk about privileged accounts in the Oracle e-Business Suite, there's really three different categories. If you look at the application accounts, you've got the sysadmin account. At the Oracle database layer, you do have the apps account, but you do have some other ones, such as Applis, Sys, and System, as well as the 250-plus e-Business Suite schema accounts. And then at the operating system, you've got the classic one, root. If you're running on Linux, if you're running on Windows, you've got the administrator account. And then you also have the Oracle and potentially an Apple Manager account. So when we first talk about the apps account, one of the key issues with the apps account is that it is a very privileged account in the Oracle e-Business Suite. It owns all the data. It's got access to quite a few different functions that can do just about everything in the application. So the key question is, how do you manage the apps account? First, you shouldn't be giving the password out. And so the key is, how do you manage that password so it's controlled by just hopefully the application DBAs? And if other people need access to that type of information, you really should be creating individual named accounts for those users. So a lot of times you'll have business analysts and other people that have to get into the Oracle e-Business Suite. In some organizations we see the apps account is given out for those type of permissions and privileges for like a business analyst. Well, they should have their own unique account that should be read-only. Because as soon as you give out the apps account, anyone can enter any transactions and do things like that. So the first key is controlling the password, making sure it's in like a database vault and only the application DBAs can control it. The second is logging and monitoring access to the account. So one of the key issues is it's a generic privileged account. So who's actually using it? Is the password being shared? We actually see a lot of times in organizations that the developers are actually getting access to the apps account. And what they're doing is they actually just can create a concurrent manager program, and because a lot of concurrent manager shell programs need the apps account password passed in, they can actually echo out the apps password. So it's very important to actually log and monitor all accesses to the apps account to look where it's being accessed from and who's using it. And then finally is doing some auditing, making sure that what the password is routinely changed, looking through those logins. So if you are logging all the accesses, actually look, is it being accessed from non-application servers? Who owns those type of machines? Then least but not last, don't forget to actually look at all the other accounts in the environment. So in an Oracle E-Business Suite environment, you've got many different application accounts involved. So you've got the sys account, the system account. There is also the AppLSys account. The AppLSys account has to have the same password as the apps account. And then also in the Oracle database, you've got all the other schema owners. So in Oracle E-Business Suite, you've got over 250 schema accounts, and each one, like GL, has a default password GL. Oh, by the way, they own the data for those modules, but they also have significant privileges. So anytime you can access any one of the schema accounts, you can also do anything you want in the database because they have a couple key packages that they have access to, such as apps DDL, which allows them to execute any data definition language, etc. So there is a lot of generic access, so it does take some time to work through and how to control the apps account, trying to control the password, make sure you're logging and things like that. So hopefully we answered that question. So the next question is, user management provides RBAC. So that's role-based access control. Can you implement user management along with the default responsibilities, or must you migrate fully into user management? We are a long-time EBS user and have a history of assigned responsibilities. I'll turn this one over to Mike to answer.
Thank you, Steve. So role-based access control, I think those of you who have been on the Oracle E-Business Suite since 11.5.10, there's some optional patches when it first appeared there with the user management, UMX, and certainly as you have upgraded to Release 12, you've seen more adoption of the various Oracle development teams with regard to UMX and security being driven out of UMX as far as grants and permissions. When you get down to it, RBAC is a layer above, it's a way of grouping responsibilities. Commonly, what we see is a set of responsibilities that are awarded out to, let's say, all U.S. employees versus a different set of responsibilities to all Canadian employees. You can give these sets names, and you could have inheritance. So you could have a set of just employees versus contractors, and then you could have Canadian employees versus U.S. employees. That said, to answer the question here, the answer is that you're always going to have a mix. If you look at role-based access control as a means of automating, you're never going to get to the point of, let's say, setting out a complete list of all possible permutations of users and roles or responsibilities that they could have. Usually what we're seeing here, and actually how we'll say the way Oracle works, is that there is a set of common responsibilities that you're going to implement through RBAC, and then there are going to be the ad hoc administration of other responsibilities. So, I think it's the proverbial 80-20 rule. Hopefully that answers the question. And if not, I guess with any of these questions, if we need a follow-up, please contact us. Steve, you were going to take the next one, correct?
So the next question is, Oracle is telling us not to change the AppLSYSPUB password. Should I change the AppLSYSPUB password? And that's from Vinod. So this is actually a really good question that we get quite often. So for those of you who don't know, every Oracle E-Business Suite environment has an account similar to the apps account, but this one's called APPLSYSPUB. There's a very well-known password, pub, and this is a holdover from the client-server days. So anyone on the call remembering 10.6, 10.7 Smart Client will remember the APPLSYSPUB account, and that's the account that was used to access the application. It's still used in some environments, especially 11i, when you may have ADI and other client-server utilities connecting, because those utilities need some sort of database account to at least allow access. And the password is always pub. And Oracle looks at it as this is not actually a security vulnerability. It's actually a well-known account, but the key issue is that there are very few permissions. So if we look at the permissions of the APPLSYSPUB account, it's fairly limited. There is some execute, insert, and select permissions for the account. And there's actually a script in the FND top, affpubfix.sql, which will actually revoke any extraneous permissions and grant the very specific permissions required for APPLSYSPUB. So this isn't really a problem. If you connect with the APPLSYSPUB account, you're limited to exactly what Oracle wants you to access. There's really no major security issues here. You're probably seeing a little bit more than you should, but we have reviewed these packages very carefully. We did find several years ago a number of security vulnerabilities, and those have been fixed by Oracle. However, within the Oracle database, there is something called public permissions. And so you've got the Oracle database, and you've got many, many public permissions. So the problem is not what's been granted specifically to the APPLSYSPUB account, it's the public privileges within the Oracle database. So public privileges are granted to every single user, and you can't revoke them. So if you revoke it from public, you can revoke that specific permission, but no one else can access that who is expecting it to be granted to public. So there's no way to specifically say APPLSYSPUB can't have these public privileges. That's not the way the Oracle database works. So if we start looking at the public privileges for the APPLSYSPUB account, it has 28,000 execute privileges on different packages within the Oracle database. And these are all public. These are things like util file, util HTTP. And if you start revoking a lot of these public permissions, the application will break very quickly. So one of the security recommendations if you look through the standard Oracle database security guides out there, they'll say, oh, definitely revoke util file. Well, by the way, if you revoke util file, I can guarantee your customizations will stop working, and most likely the Oracle E-Business Suite at some point will stop working. So you really need to have these public permissions, but APPLSYSPUB can actually access all of these. And there's no way to stop this. And this is the reason we recommend you actually change the APPLSYSPUB password from pub. So one of the key things that we always do during our security assessments is if you want to hack into your own Oracle E-Business Suite environment and you can connect to the database, the first thing you really should do is connect as APPLSYSPUB, passwords pub, and start looking around. And oh, by the way, you can now execute any of these public permissions. You can look at all the other users in the database, and if you've done any incorrect grants, so all your customizations, interfaces, and conversions need some grants, well, what we see a lot of time is to make those work appropriately, people just do public grants. So, oh, by the way, APPLSYSPUB can access that. So this is a fairly high-risk security vulnerability, in our opinion, with Oracle E-Business Suite, even though Oracle doesn't acknowledge it. And, by the way, a lot of these security vulnerabilities that are patched as part of the critical patch updates are in public packages. So if you aren't immediately updating and applying Oracle critical patch updates, you've got a vulnerability there. And then there's probably some other issues in the environment that I can exploit. And if I can't do that, if I can't exploit anything, at least I can see exactly what's going on in your database. So if people can connect anywhere on your network to the Oracle database and they can connect as APPLSYSPUB, they can do a lot of damage and or see a lot of information in the database. So we always recommend in release 12, 12.0, 12.1, 12.2 to change the APPLSYSPUB password from pub. You do have to change it both in the application layer and in the database layer, so you need to do it via FND pass versus doing it directly. If you are running 11i and you're running programs like ADI, it becomes much more problematic to change it. So we recommend you actually put some logging and access controls around APPLSYSPUB in the database versus changing the APPLSYSPUB password in 11i. We found it. You can do it. We have some of our clients that are very secure do it quite often. However, we've also found a lot of bugs and a lot of problems in 11i customers trying to change it. So the answer is yes, please change it, but be very careful when you are changing the password. And Oracle recommends doing it through FNDCPass, which then will also update autoconfig, and you may also have to run autoconfig after you've changed it. So hopefully that's answered the question on AppLSYSPUB. So the next question is, are there system reports showing the access rights embedded in forms personalization screens? And I'll actually turn this one over to Mike.
Thanks, Steve. You know, Steve, I think I'll speak to this. I don't know if we have a slide queued up specifically for this, but there was an observation I saw. Somebody was asking whether or not we're advancing the slides. Some of these questions we've anticipated a few questions, and we do have slides for. Others we'll just need to talk through. There are two different types, to answer this question, there are two different types of personalizations. We have the professional forms and we have the Oracle Application Framework. Yes, we do have a slide for this. This is the professional forms personalization. I think of this as a wrapper for the custom library, for those of you familiar with that. The access rights, when it gets down to it, there's no one report that you can run that's going to list out certainly the personalizations, but to answer the question here, the access rights that might have been embedded in these. In our assessments, we use custom SQL to extract out and build up from a few different sources what personalizations, let's say, have open arguments layered on top of what those might have forms personalizations that are hiding or rendering certain fields invisible. For the Oracle Applications Framework, that's a little bit more tricky. Actually, there's another question I saw that came in here that's related that I probably should speak to, which is, what are the reporting options for personalizations within EBS? My general advice with regard to personalizations, what I've seen work very well, is to use the FND Loader utility. This utility allows you to export and import customizations, chemleys, rice items, and included in that are personalizations. So it's very easy to export your personalizations from a test environment out to these loader files. You can place these loader files, best practice, under source code control, and then you can import them into production during your production windows. When you need to start thinking about reporting on certainly OAF personalizations, which if you have a large footprint, you can have many hundreds of these as far as on different pages throughout, let's say, iStore, iRecruitment, or as well as internally facing. By using the FND loader and either native functionality within your source code control tool, or just a file diff editor, allows you to report on differences or determine differences between different, let's say, before and after patching. But just to go back to the question here, what are the reporting options for personalizations? Oracle really doesn't give you a set tool for that. It's usually what I've seen is customization. If somebody knows of something, please correct me. The other question was, are there reports that show the embedded access rights that have been, let's say, implemented through personalizations? And the answer, again, there's no one set of reports, and certainly the access reports are, you'd have to hand code those. Steve, I think the next question I have here, excuse me, let's see, I have a question from Ron. And from an audit perspective, how can I determine which, if any, programs or apps have been changed along with the corresponding dates? I need to ensure that appropriate controls are followed as far as SOX testing. There are a few options for this. Certainly the challenge of change control within the Oracle eBusiness suite as a whole due to the complexity of how the e-business suite is implemented both within the database and over the file system. First and foremost, you need to think about what auditing you do have in place. The specific question here as far as concurrent programs and/or custom apps and how those could be monitored. Our log and audit framework that is available off our website. This is about a 40-page white paper that goes through the steps to enable the application layer auditing. There's multiple layers of auditing within the suite as well as within the database itself, and we've mapped this methodology out to not only SOX but also PCI and HIPAA. So Ron, I would highly suggest if you finding that document and pulling that down. Thanks, Steve. As far as the slide here, as far as showing the various compliance standards up at the top, feeding into our common foundation, and then we're pulling, showing you through in the framework how to set up that auditing within the database as well as an e-business suite for that. Whether or not you're pulling it into a centralized logging facility or certainly just having it available for reporting. Another option to consider would be maybe in conjunction with the log and audit framework. We did have a blog post a few weeks ago with regard to how an auditor could use the DBMS SQL hash function within the Oracle database to hash various result sets, if not digitally sign. So if an auditor has a result set, a SQL select that would select against all concurrent programs, and you wanted to then digitally sign that or hash it, you could do so using the DBMS SQL hash, have that SHA-1 hash that you could then compare over time periods, and if the hash has changed, you know that the data has changed. But to, I think, really answer this question correctly, implementing logging and auditing is what you need to do. If you have tools such as Splunk or Oracle Audit Vault or ArcSight, it makes it a little bit easier. Certainly you could set up logging and auditing without, but the framework, if you download that, Ron, should give you a good start, and if you have any questions, please contact us.
And let me add one thing to that we often see. Some of the audit firms have a query that they come in with that looks at the DBA objects table and looks at the last DDL date. And the last DDL date should be defined as the last time something changed. So if you are uploading new packages into the database, you can go look at the DBA objects and look at the last DDL date and see what's changed. Unfortunately, that is not truly when it changed. It's actually when it was last compiled. So we see a lot of auditors come in and go retrieve that query and say, oh, look at all these objects that have changed in the database. And in reality, the object has not changed. It was just recompiled, and there's a variety of reasons, such as a dependency changed, so it had to be recompiled. So even though the auditors are saying things have changed, things may not have changed. So we actually see a lot of clients struggle with that with the external auditors. So that's one good reason to implement an auditing and logging solution where you're actually getting the true changes to the database. So whenever a new package is updated, you can actually capture that as an audit trail event. So that's always very important.
Steve, I saw a question just came in that we probably could answer within the context of the slide that we have up right now.
Perfect.
And Pravan is asking, if I give super user rights and privileges to the IT support team, how can I ensure that they are not performing any transactions? What access does the IT support team need to have in production? So a log and audit framework will go a long ways towards evidence of governance and control, and certainly as a deterrence potentially to the IT support team to know that they're being logged and audited. And as well, I think this goes into a overall compliance stance as far as if you are certainly not just SOX, but also certainly if you're PCI and or HIPAA compliant. As far as what access they should have in production, least privilege is always a good first answer. Read-only menus sometimes help as well. There's also, over time, IT support can accumulate responsibilities. If you have the option to review, potentially on a month-over-month, or have a policy that certain tickets or support tickets, if they need a responsibility, that responsibility is opened and then closed, and ideally end dated. If you are giving temporary access, you could have a policy that if the IT support team gets a ticket that and they need a net new responsibility, that let's say that you, when you're granting the responsibility, that you predate, and let's say that's 2 weeks out. Hopefully I answered the question there, Pavan. If not, please give a follow-up.
Okay, so the next question is from Scott. The URL firewall keeps getting disabled on our DMZ servers. What is happening? Do we really need to have it enabled? And this is actually an interesting one because we see this quite often. And so within the Oracle eBusiness Suite, when you're deploying it in the DMZ, Oracle eBusiness Suite installs every module no matter what. So everyone on the call today is running Oracle Student System. Even though you haven't bought it, licensed it, or anything, it's still there. All the web pages are there. So if we look at the footprint for Oracle eBusiness Suite R12, you've got over 20,000 web pages running on the internet. Even though you don't want that to happen, they're still there. And so Oracle came up with a solution called the URL firewall. And so what the URL firewall is basically a block and says, okay, we'll give a white list of what should be allowed running on the internet. And so you actually go in and you need to be enabling it through autoconfig. And when you enable it through autoconfig, it then changes a setting in one of the http.com files and then turns on the URL firewall, which is a set of Apache rewrite rules, which then is just basically a whitelist of all the files that can be allowed on a DMZ environment. The mistake that we often see is you need to be actually enabling it through autoconfig versus enabling it directly in the file. So if you look through the httpd.com file, you'll actually see a comment in front of the URL_fw.com file. And if you remove that comment in the file and bounce Apache, then the URL firewall is enabled. But the problem is that file is controlled by autoconfig, so next time you run autoconfig, it'll actually overwrite the file. And so when we look at the picture, we've got the picture before, and now that we've got the URL firewall enabled, it's actually blocking access to many, many, many web pages. So the key answer to the question is that unless you enable it in autoconfig, it won't stick. So if you just change the http.com file and remove the comment and rebounce Apache, it'll be there for a while, but next time you run autoconfig, it'll overwrite that file because those files are controlled by autoconfig. So you do have to make sure that you've done it appropriately in the autoconfig settings. As a second part to the question, there's also the node trust level. And so you've got all these pages, and the URL firewall is only blocking the Java server pages, not the OA framework pages. So Oracle actually has a second layer of security on the DMZ that you should be enabling, which is a set of responsibilities called node trust level, which are allowed externally. So if you don't enable node trust level, anybody with like system administrator responsibility can go in through the DMZ and actually do system administration functions, UMX, all those type of things. So you want to limit and block externally exactly what you're running. And so both the URL firewall and the node trust level are two things that you need to be enabling in the DMZ to allow only exactly what should be running externally. And this basically reduces the surface area. So if there's known security vulnerabilities, if there's just a lot of pages that are running, you want to reduce that surface area so you're protected as much as possible when running on the internet. Oracle eBusiness Suite was never designed to be run on the internet. The DMZ configuration had to be evolved by Oracle to try to limit access to this monstrous application on the internet. So that's a little bit about the URL firewall and a common mistake that we see when it just gets disabled, and the key is it has to be done through autoconfig versus directly in the files.
Mike and Steve, could I interject with another question from the audience?
Sure.
And this is from Ron. It says, we are integrating EBS with OAM. Do you know of any known issues with Active Directory authentication to EBS?
You want to take this, Mike?
Yeah, my first answer would be, off the top of my head, no, but there's certainly a good amount of reading and research that would need to be done there as far as the certification levels and how the different, how the different desktop utilities, be it ADI and Discover, if those are being used, how they would potentially consume the identities. OBIEE also comes to mind. We recently set up a Kerberos authentication, a proof of concept for a customer. Kerberos is actually a protocol that Active Directory speaks natively that allows you to set up, we'll say, Active Directory authentication natively into the Oracle database. But for the Oracle eBusiness Suite, you would need to use OAM or OID. Again, off the top of my head, there's no issues that immediately come to mind there. If I think of something, I will certainly reach out to you, Ron.
Yeah, so it definitely works. We've got a lot of our customers are running with both OID and OAM. It's certified by Oracle. It is not the easiest setup in the world. It does take a little bit of time. It can be problematic if you are running in a DMZ configuration and you want to do different things. We were working recently with a client that had internal users, external users, and they were trying to segment those and use different directories for different sets of users, and that became very problematic and just trying to make it all work. It worked in the end, but they did struggle with it for a while, so I would definitely leave plenty of time in the project timeline to have it work. And there are known bugs, and Oracle's fixed most of them, but it does take some tweaking and troubleshooting to make it work along the way. So the next question is, Release 12.2 has online patching, and during patching it accesses all nodes through SSH. Our issue is that the nodes in the DMZ can't be accessed unless we have firewall rules to allow those connections.
Set the sign up. Oh.
Go ahead.
Steve, you're back. Sorry, you cut out there for a moment, so I was just taking the next question.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Leslie was asking, in the professional forms, can we set the sign-on audit level and capture all access? In the professional forms, we can set the sign-on audit to capture all access to the professional forms. This does not capture access to the framework pages or self-service pages. How can we capture access to the framework pages? I've read this is a multi-step configuration or some process, but it is not clear to me. So Leslie, to answer your question, what you're asking about is the JTF page access tracking. So Oracle has two different user interface technologies, the professional forms and we'll say the self-service forms. The sign-on audit is how you set the access tracking on the professional forms, and the JTF page access tracking is what you need to set up. Our log and audit framework that I referenced earlier, I believe gives a pretty straightforward set of steps to enable JTF page access tracking. That white paper is available up on our website. And just a real quick high-level explanation, you basically navigate into a single form, a self-service form, that allows you to globally turn on JTF access tracking. You then tag each application that you then want to track and how much information you want to gather for each event. There's about 4 different levels there of increasing variability, of increasing amount of session variables and cookie information. Once you have enabled that, there's a concurrent program that needs to run probably on a daily basis, though you could schedule to run more frequently, to move the raw data into the reporting tables, as well as a rolling purge of data, whether or not you're keeping the 10 weeks or 12 months rolling. The process usually goes pretty quick. Behind the scenes, what this setup form is doing is actually setting profile options, and you can in our if you follow the notes in our framework guide, there's actually a we list out those profile options and some SQL to help you monitor what has been enabled. So Leslie, to answer your question, it's JTF page access tracking. It's pretty straightforward, and I think our log and audit framework doc does a good job at that.
Very good. So the next question.
Steve, want to take the next question here. It's from Martine, and the question is, the Asaka Oracle eBusiness Suite Security, Audit, and Control Features book, is it still a good guide to what is the most important things to test in the Oracle eBusiness Suite? And the short answer is yes. Steve Coast here, Integrigy, was one of the reviewers. And I would also offer up that not only is the the Asaka eBusiness Suite Control Audit Features a good book, but the Asaka Security, Audit, and Control Features for the Oracle Database is an equally good book, and Mr. Coast is also a reviewer there. Another book, if you are not aware of it, is Jeff Hare's Oracle eBusiness Suite Controls, Application Security and Best Practices. All three of these you can pull off of Amazon. And I guess I would also offer up, of course, the Oracle hardening guides off of the Oracle Support MetaLink site, which Integrigy, if you look at the copy right there, Integrigy largely is given credit for the content. And I'll make yet another plug for our log and audit framework. We really put a lot of work into that earlier in the year as far as reestablishing our baseline as far as log and audit recommendations for the Oracle eBusiness Suite. So, Martine, I would say yes, that's a pretty good book there, your original question there, and the other Asaka book and Jeff Hare's book are certainly all the ones to get for your bookshelf. Steve, I think I'll turn it over to you for the next one here.
Yeah, so the next question is, the July 2014 CPU was released this week. How quickly should we apply it? So we're in the middle of our analysis, and we should have it completed today of the CPU. And there's 5 different vulnerabilities this quarter. And this is average with all the other quarters. Nothing stands out as terribly bad, but there are a number of vulnerabilities that are important. Integrigy was credited with actually finding one of the vulnerabilities this quarter. Of the 4 vulnerabilities related to release 12, one is in iStore. It is a response HTTP response splitting attack, and so if you are running iStore on the internet, we would recommend that you actually apply the patch sooner than later, because it does affect a number of different areas. There is a separate patch for 11i for the web server component, and there is an SSL vulnerability in that. Fortunately, that SSL vulnerability is very low risk. It's nothing like the Heartbleed that came out this past spring, and it does require you to actually have both OpenSSL running on the web server, which would be in this case EBS, but also have it running on the web browser. So if you're running EBS on the web browser, you would be vulnerable to a man-in-the-middle attack. Fortunately, any web browser that almost every client would be using accessing your systems would not be vulnerable. So Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer are not vulnerable. The only one we have found that anyone would be running on a regular basis would be Chrome on an Android phone. So most likely people aren't running that to access your Oracle eBusiness Suite environment. So if you are running 11i, there is the separate web server patch, and we kind of view that as an almost optional patch to apply. So kind of the end story about it all was, if you're running iStore on the internet, we'd probably think about applying it sooner than later, and then the rest of the bugs for both 11i and R12 environments are kind of the middle of the road, nothing super serious, and apply it as you probably would with any of the other eBusiness Suite CPUs going back the last 10 years. So the next question is from Steve. How do I find where Social Security numbers are stored in the Oracle eBusiness Suite? And then kind of a follow-up question was, how do I encrypt those Social Security numbers in the Oracle eBusiness Suite? So within the Oracle eBusiness Suite, Oracle does an okay job of centralizing the Social Security numbers. The key table that they are stored in is PER all people F table. There are a number of other tables that they may be stored, and when we do our sensitive data reviews at clients, we actually find it in quite a few different tables. So if we kind of bring up the chart here, we can kind of show you some of the tables. So these are some of the standard tables that we see where sensitive data is stored in the Oracle eBusiness Suite. If you look at the center column, that's where for Social Security numbers. And you always have to remember when you're thinking about Social Security numbers, most people concentrate on the employee Social Security numbers. So those would be stored in PER all people F. They may be stored in a couple other HR tables, such as Ben reporting, which is for benefits, HR, H2PI employees. We also have to remember that those Social Security numbers may be stored also as tax IDs or 1099s. So if you do have a lot of subcontractors who are independent, their tax ID would be a Social Security number. So that would fall under all the privacy regulations, breach notification rules that are state by state. So those tend to get scattered a lot more. So those would be in AP suppliers and a bunch of other tables. So then also when you need to think about Social Security numbers may be stored in a number of other different tables. So when we do a sensitive data sweep within Oracle eBusiness Suite environment, we often see it in many, many other tables. So a lot of the tables that we will see it in are custom tables, so you may have interfaces coming and going. You also may have it in maintenance tables. So one of the very common things that we see happen is the DBA, as soon as they get a patch from Oracle or are requested to do a direct SQL update, and let's say in this case it's HR, PR, all people F table, what they'll do is create a copy of the table. They'll do create table as select from, and they'll create a backup table just in case anything goes wrong. Well, then what happens is they go tell the business analyst or someone, oh, I did what you told me to do, go check and see if it's working. And most likely what happens is that other table that they created as the backup table just sits there forever. And it's not uncommon for us when we're doing sensitive data reviews to actually find 4 or 5 copies of the PR all people F table that have been sitting around for years and years and years. And then what happens is when you do clones to your test and development environments, no one knows to scramble the data in those tables, so that's how you're actually getting live credit or live Social Security numbers in your test and development environments. And then it may be in interface tables. Occasionally we'll find it in a flex field. And then remember also at the operating system level, you may have interface files coming and going, so you may be writing things out to, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield, those type of things. So we do see Social Security numbers in quite a few different tables. It is hard to find. You do have to go table by table looking and have some sort of sensitive data tool that looks for it. The second part of the question is, how do I actually encrypt credit card or Social Security numbers in the Oracle eBusiness Suite? Oracle provides no standard way of doing that. They do for credit card numbers, but not for Social Security numbers. The only effective way that we found is using the disk level solutions, such as Oracle TDE, which is transparent data encryption, or some of the data storage vendors do provide disk level encryption, or there's other third-party products like Vormetric that can encrypt it. The key is those encryption solutions are at the disk level, so it is encrypting it when it's written out to disk, not when someone's signed on. So if you use Oracle TDE, you have to remember the limitation of Oracle TDE is when I'm actually connecting to the database, I don't ever see anything with TDE. It's unencrypted when I sign on to the database. So if I can go in as the apps user, I can fully see all the Social Security numbers unencrypted. If I steal a backup tape, if I steal a disk file, if I steal a disk drive, the data is encrypted. But once I sign on to the database, the data is not encrypted. So there are limited encryption solutions for Social Security numbers. So hopefully that covered that question.
Steve, I see a few questions here that I think I can go through quick, and then Peter also has some interesting questions that were just posted. So let me go through a few of these quick here, and the deference for time here. I want to make sure that we have enough time. I've enabled, Ann asked, I've enabled credit card encryption. Is there anything else I need to do? Yes is the answer. We actually have a white paper up on our website that you can pull down that will walk through at least two lists of things, scheduled and ongoing, things that you need to think about on an annual basis. You need to rotate the wallet encryption keys that are protecting your credit card numbers. You need to think about every 90 days sweeping for inactive users and making sure that all active users have had their password changed. There needs to be daily log review. So to be PCI compliant is much more than just a one-day pull the lever, encrypt the cards. It is really a 365-day task. There's something to do every day of the year for PCI. Is just the short answer there, and I think our white paper will do you pretty good as far as giving you the list there. Next question, corporate PCI related. Frederico asks, I only have corporate cards stored in eBusiness Suite. Do I need to encrypt them for PCI compliance? If, Frederico, if you read your cardholder agreement, you will probably see that corporate cards are not subject to PCI. Your card holder, your card issuer, be it American Express or Visa or MasterCard, probably highly suggests to protect them, but you are not obligated to do so. If you go through and follow the Oracle notes to encrypt credit card data, credit cards within the eBusiness Suite, corporate cards will be encrypted if you so wanted to do. And again, Federico, our white paper on PCI compliance that's up on our website goes into this in much more detail with regard to your specific question. Let's see, Steve, let me take a couple more here. Can I use Oracle EBS responsibilities within OBIEE? So Aman, to answer your question is yes. However, you will need to set up application roles within Oracle Enterprise Manager on a one-by-one basis and start building those grants. Whether or not you want to do that for all EBS responsibilities or just the primary responsibilities driving the transactional reporting that you're doing out of OBIE, you probably want to at least start small and then build out. Rajesh asks, what account should I use for OBIEE when connecting to the Oracle eBusiness Suite? We are currently using the apps account. Rajesh, I would encourage you to not use the apps account. The apps account is highly privileged, just storing that app's password, though it's encrypted in the RPD file. If you are rotating the app's password on any great frequency as a best practice, that is just yet one more place that you would need to rotate. Best practice, at least Integrigy's recommendation, would be to create a dedicated account within the database and credential that appropriately. For example, if you only need access to certain financial data, only grant access, read-only access to that account such that inside of OBIEE, and if you look at our best practices, and we have another presentation on the top 10 security risk for OBIEE, we go into this more detail. You want to keep whatever account that you're connecting to is least privileged as possible. There's certainly some security risk within OBIEE. Steve, should I go on, or did you have another that you wanted to address? I'll take the next one then. Mark asks, our security team is pushing us on updating Java and the documentation says I need to sign the jar files. What is jar file signing, and what do I need to do? The standard functionality of Java allows you to package up code into zip files, jar files. Think of these as zip files that are executed on your client. What Oracle is saying is that the Java best practices is that when that code is executing on your laptop per se, you want to make sure that that code is clean and is coming from a trustworthy source. So how the code signing works is that you create a request to a code signing authority, let's say VeriSign. You then get back from them a certificate, and by signing your jar files, you're actually including that certificate in that zip file per se, in that jar file, such that every time the code is executing on your laptop, your browser is actually checking that certificate, and through the web of trust is able to actually walk back up to VeriSign and know that that code is clean and safe to execute. The steps for this are numerous. We actually have a few blog posts on Integrigy.com. We actually have an FAQ that, Mark, I would say if you're reading over the Oracle docs, take a peek at our blog entries. That'll probably set you in a good direction. If you have more follow-up questions, please reach out to us.
So we've got a couple more questions here, one from Peter. We are utilizing virtual private database. Are there any best practices regarding certain tables that this security policy should not be applied to, i.e. concern for performance issues? For VPD with Oracle E-Business Suite, we have not seen any performance issues. You can break the application by restricting certain tables, but we actually haven't seen many problems at all. It's surprisingly how well VPD does work with Oracle E-Business Suite. You do have to have the correct design when you're going in and understand exactly who you want to block access to. We often recommend using VPD when you're doing multiple applications in the single Oracle E-Business Suite environment. So if you do have an Oracle E-Business Suite production database and you have some other applications running within that, VPD is a fabulous solution, especially when you're trying to segment and segregate responsibilities among DBAs. We don't see it used very often with Oracle E-Business Suite, but for the customers who do have specific requirements, it does work very well. But you do have to spend a little bit of time working on it. Another question from Peter, are there any seeded reporting that can be run to get information on workflow authority delegation, i.e. vacation rules, work access lists, work list access, or proxy? I don't know of any good ones. We have all our own queries that are very specific, trying to pull that information out of the Oracle E-Business Suite database. So I'm not sure. Mike, do you know if there's any seeded reporting? I don't think there is. Or if there is, we looked at it and it was awful, and so we don't use it. So I know we have our own custom queries.
I would agree.
Then another question from Pavan. We are on 11.5.9. How can we ensure individual user accounts were not shared? Do we have any technical solution to trace their IP address?
Well, through the log and audit framework, I would encourage Pavan, if you haven't so implemented the sign-on audit, even better the JTF tracking, page access tracking. I think that could help you at least correlate some events. When it gets down to the database, because all of the users are connecting as apps, it does make that a little bit harder to triangulate.
Yeah, and the challenge here has always been back to the IP address. This is one area where Oracle has not done a very good job about pulling the IP address into the application. With page access tracking, depending on the exact version, I'd have to double check my notes on which versions actually can capture the IP address and which versions don't. That's always been problematic. Our App Defend product, one of the features that we specifically wrote into it was the ability to track user sign-ons to IP addresses and then have the ability to send that off to an external tool, logging SIM tool that can then actually correlate and watch for those types of events. But natively within the application, Oracle has done a very poor job about getting back to the IP address. And users do need multiple logins, so it's kind of hard to look at just logins to say, okay, if an individual user account has 2 or 3 logins, there are scenarios when people need to do that, so that's not uncommon. It's really getting back to, are they sharing an account across multiple systems, and how do you do that? And then we also see a lot of misconfigurations on the F5s and things. If you do have a proxy or a load balancer in front, you do have to make sure it's configured to actually pass in the true IP address, because otherwise you'll just see the IP address of the load balancer. So you always have to be careful about that. But Oracle does not have a great solution for that.
So a couple other, so this is 11.5.10, but a couple other ideas come to mind as far as not only the logging and the auditing, but also, the password expiry, making sure that the passwords are expiring and being rotated on a regular basis can help discourage sharing. Again, it's 11.5.10, but single sign-on possibly could help with that as far as going through OID, and people are probably going to not be as willing to share their network credentials as they might be to the e-business suite.
Yeah, very much so. As soon as you tell someone you're going to share their AD credentials, they're a little bit more suspicious than just sharing an EBS credential. Another thing in Release 12 that we see is a huge challenge with Oracle E-Business Suite is the commonly scheduled concurrent manager programs. So you may have in General Ledger certain processes that are scheduled, so often those are created under a generic user, because the problem is if you create them under a named user and that person leaves or changes job roles, you have to now change those over to a generic account. So most Oracle E-Business Suite implementations have generic accounts with scheduled concurrent manager programs. The problem is then those accounts are shared and often used, and that is a SOX control violation. Your auditors should be looking for that type of thing. In Release 12, Oracle did release the proxy feature that allows accounts to be shared, and it's intended for the assistant to the CEO to be able to go into the CEO's account. If you talk to any auditor, that's a really bad idea to do, but that proxy feature actually works very effectively for those shared concurrent manager programs. So now you can actually proxy out that shared account and prohibit direct logins by just changing the password, but then giving proxy to that account to many different users, and you at least have some control, because now they have to go into their named account and they have to proxy over to the generic account. So even though it's still a generic account, which isn't the most desirable thing, at least now you can have some controls around it in Release 12. It doesn't help on 11.5.10, but that is one solution to fix that issue. So we are running out of time. I think we've answered a number of questions. We didn't get to some, but hopefully this was helpful.